Zoro's blades are more than just steel. They are living, breathing entities with a thirst for blood. From the ancestral legacy of the Wado Ichimonji to the soul-devouring hunger of Enma, each sword carries a malevolent spirit. Today, we unmask the cursed Shimotsuki ghosts that demand Zoro's very soul for mastery. From the very beginning of his journey, Roronoa Zoro was never just a swordsman. He was a vessel for legacy, for ambition, and for something far more spiritual than most fans realize. Because in the world of One Piece, swords are not lifeless weapons. The greatest blades are said to possess personalities, wills, and in some cases, something that feels disturbingly close to a soul. And Zoro, more than almost anyone else, walks the thin line between mastering these spirits and being consumed by them. At the center of everything lies the Wado Ichimonji, the most quiet yet most profound of his three blades. On the surface, it is elegant, pure, almost sacred in its simplicity. But beneath that calm exterior lies a legacy that runs deeper than Zoro himself. This sword was forged by Shimotsuki Kozaburo, a master craftsman whose work was not just about shaping steel, but about embedding will into it. The Shimotsuki clan didn't just create weapons, they created extensions of spirit, blades that resonated with something beyond the physical world. And that is where Kuina enters the story. When Zoro took the Wado Ichimonji after her death, he didn't just inherit a sword, he inherited a will that refused to die. Every time he grips that blade, or more importantly, every time he clenches it between his teeth, he is carrying more than steel. He is carrying the echo of a promise, the weight of 2001 defeats, and the unfulfilled ambition of someone who was meant to stand at the very top of the world. The sword doesn't scream, it doesn't demand blood. Instead, it watches, silently, patiently, like a ghost that refuses to leave. This is what makes the Wado Ichimonji so different from the other swords Zoro would come to wield. Its spirit is not chaotic, it is disciplined. It aligns with something known as the breath of all things, a concept that transcends simple swordsmanship. It is the idea that everything in the world has a rhythm, a voice, a presence, and a true swordsman does not cut recklessly, but in harmony with that existence. Through the craftsmanship of Kozaburo, that philosophy is embedded into the very core of the blade. Zoro doesn't just swing the Wado Ichimonji, he listens to it. And that connection becomes the foundation of everything he builds later. But as his journey continues, the purity of that blade is challenged, violently. Because not all swords are patient. Some are hungry. The moment Zoro encounters the Sandai Kitetsu, everything changes. Unlike the calm, almost spiritual presence of the Wado Ichimonji, the Kitetsu doesn't wait. It doesn't observe. It hungers. The blade is cursed, and not in some abstract way. Its curse is alive, active, and deeply malevolent. It seeks blood, not just the blood of enemies, but the blood of its own wielder. This is the true nature of the Kitetsu lineage. These swords are said to bring misfortune, to drag their users toward death as if guided by an unseen force. But what makes this curse terrifying is that it behaves like a test, a constant, relentless challenge to the one who dares to wield it. It is as if the sword is asking a single question: are you strong enough to survive me? And in Logtown, Zoro answers. Instead of rejecting the blade, instead of fearing its curse, he throws it into the air and extends his arm, offering his own body as proof of his resolve. It is a moment that defies logic, reason, and even survival instinct. Because this is not just a gamble of luck, it is a direct confrontation between Zoro's ambition and the will of the sword itself. When the blade spares him, it is not mercy, it is recognition. From that moment on, the Sandai Kitetsu becomes than just a weapon. It becomes a predator that has accepted Zoro as his master, for now. But that acceptance comes with a cost. The bloodlust of the sword begins to bleed into Zoro's own fighting style. His attacks become more feral, more aggressive, as if something inside him is starting to awaken. This is where we begin to see the earliest traces of something darker, something demonic. The cursed nature of the Kitetsu doesn't just influence his strikes, it shapes his aura. It amplifies his killing intent to a level that feels almost supernatural. And over time, that presence manifests into something that cannot be explained by physical strength alone. A Sora, a form where Zoro appears to grow additional heads and arms, transforming into a demonic entity that embodies pure destruction. This is not just a technique. It is the visible collision of Zoro's spirit with the entities residing within his blades. But even the chaos of the Kitetsu is not the final stage of this evolution, because there exists a blade far more demanding, far more unforgiving: Enma. If the Kitetsu is a predator, then Enma is a king, a blade that does not merely test its wielder, it judges them. Forged by the same legendary lineage as the Wado Ichimonji, Enma carries a completely different personality. It is not calm, it is not chaotic, it is dominant. This is the sword that once belonged to Kozuki Oden, a man whose strength was so immense that he could tame its monstrous appetite. Because Enma doesn't simply cut, it takes. The moment Zoro first wields it, the blade begins to drain his Haki, pulling it out of him violently, as if trying to consume his very essence. This is not a flaw, it is the true nature of the sword. Enma forces its wielder to give everything, not a portion of their strength, not controlled output, but everything they have. It demands mastery not just of the body, but of spirit. If the user cannot control their Haki perfectly, the sword will take more than intended, leaving them drained, or worse. And yet, Zoro doesn't let go. Because at this point in his journey, he understands something fundamental. These swords are not obstacles, they are trials. Each one represents a different kind of spirit. The Wado Ichimonji carries legacy and discipline. The Sandai Kitetsu embodies chaos and bloodlust, and Enma stands as a gatekeeper of power, a blade that refuses to bow to anyone unworthy of kingship. Even its name reflects this. In Buddhist mythology, Enma is the ruler of the underworld, the judge of souls, the one who decides who is worthy and who is not. And in many ways, the sword lives up to that name. It drags Zoro to the edge of his limits, forcing him to confront not just his strength, but his worth. Because to wield Enma is to stand before judgment and survive it. By the time Zoro stands with all three blades at his side, something extraordinary begins to take shape, not just in his fighting style, but within his very existence. Because what he wields is no longer just a collection of swords. It is a convergence of spirits, each one carrying its own will, its own demand, its own nature. A loyal legacy, a cursed predator, and a king that devours power itself. On their own, each blade is dangerous. Together, they should be impossible. And yet, Zoro makes them coexist. This is where the true genius of Santoryu reveals itself, not as a physical technique, but as a spiritual balancing act. The Wado Ichimonji remains steady, anchoring him with discipline and purpose. It is the voice that keeps him grounded, the constant reminder of the promise he cannot afford to break. The Sandai Kitetsu, on the other hand, never truly quiets. Its hunger simmers beneath every strike, pushing Zoro toward aggression, toward risk, toward the edge of control. And then there is Enma, relentlessly pulling at his Haki, demanding more, always more, as if testing whether he truly has the right to stand among the strongest. These are not compatible forces. They clash, they resist, they pull Zoro in different directions, each one trying to assert its dominance over the others. And for a long time, Zoro doesn't truly control them. He endures them. Every battle becomes a silent struggle not just against his opponent, but against the very weapons he holds. A lesser swordsman would break under that pressure, either consumed by the curse, drained by Enma, or lost in the weight of legacy. But Zoro is not a normal swordsman, because what defines him is not just strength, it is will. Over time, something begins to change. Instead of resisting the pull of these blades, Zoro starts to understand them. He stops treating them as separate entities to suppress, and instead begins to accept what each one represents. The discipline of Wado Ichimonji, the ferocity of Sandai Kitetsu, the overwhelming demand of Enma. He doesn't reject their nature, he integrates it. And that is the moment everything shifts. Because Santoryu was never about holding 3 swords, it was about commanding 3 spirits. This evolution reaches its peak in what Zoro himself calls the King of Hell style, a name that on the surface sounds like intimidation, but in reality it is a declaration. Zoro is no longer the one being tested. He is no longer the one adapting to the will of his swords. He becomes the one they answer to. The cursed hunger of the Kitetsu no longer drives him, it fuels him. The draining force of Enma no longer weakens him, it obeys his control. And the steady presence of the Wado Ichimonji continues to anchor everything, ensuring that no matter how far he pushes into darkness, he never loses sight of why he fights. This is not balance in the traditional sense. It is dominance. Absolute, unwavering dominance over forces that were never meant to be controlled. And it is in this state that the true form of Zoro's power reveals itself once again, the manifestation of Asura. But now it is no longer just a fleeting, unexplained transformation. It becomes something far more symbolic, a visual representation of everything Zoro has become. Multiple heads, multiple arms, an overwhelming presence that feels less like a human and more like a myth. This is what happens when those 3 spiritual entities stop clashing and start merging. The disciplined ghost of the Shimotsuki legacy, the bloodthirsty curse of the Kitetsu, the kingly judgment of Enma, all of them converging into a single overwhelming force that Zoro unleashes at the peak of combat. Asura is not just an illusion. It is the embodiment of unity through conflict, a form born not from harmony, but from domination over chaos. And in that moment, Zoro stands at the center of it all, not as a victim of the spirits he wields, but as their master. A swordsman who has taken 3 completely different entities and forced them into a single purpose, a single will. His will. And that is why Santoryu works. Not because it makes sense, not because it is efficient, but because Zoro himself is strong enough to make the impossible obey. 3 swords, 3 spirits, 1 king.